prior to the release of the third episode of the 1000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach, we didn't really have an idea about how many chapters this episode would adapt. However, I don't think you would have guessed that it would have been adapting the highest count of chapters that we have seen so far. The third episode of the 1000-Year Blood War arc covers material from chapters 489 to 494, which is roughly 6 chapters worth of material. Like before, there is a lot of changes made to the way that the sequence of events unfold within the anime, as well as several scenes in the manga being straight up cut from the anime. Lastly, there were some notable additions made to the episode via some anime only scenes involving Uryu and Ryuken. Now in this video, I will be going over every change that was made between the anime and the manga, discussing additions and cuts while avoiding any moments that are just one-to-one adaptations from the manga. So join me as we compare episode 3 March of the Star-Crossed to the 6 chapters of the Bleach manga that it adapts. Now the third episode begins by continuing the confrontation between Kilge and Ichigo, as most of this material is taken straight out of chapter 489. We also backtrack and see some footage adapted from chapter 488 from the captain's meeting, where Yamamoto orders the captains to prepare for war. Now the anime is rearranging the order of some events for the sake of pacing, as well as for added dramatic effect. Episode 2 had ended with Mayuri revealing that the enemy are Quincy, which is taken from chapter 488, and is then followed by Yamamoto sharing his thoughts. But the animation staff had decided to save Yamamoto's thoughts for the start of episode 3, so that we begin the episode in an impactful manner. Now during the 2 introductory scenes of the episode, there is an anime only scene involving Shunsui, as he comments on the enemy being Quincy, as he states that they are in a tough situation and that he had assumed that the enemy were Quincy from the get-go. Now before the fighting scenes between Kilge and Ichigo taken from chapter 489 take place, there was actually a gathering of lieutenants at the start of this chapter, which is cut from the anime. We see Rukia frantically pacing as she waits for the captain's meeting to be over, as Renji reassures her by telling her to relax. Kira interrupts them as he speaks about how the disappearance of Hollows, the rebel army invading the Soul Society, and the disappearances within Rukongai are all linked to one event. He is then able to deduce, along with the other lieutenants, that the disappearances within Rukongai were in fact caused by the Shinigami and not the Quincy, and somehow Mayuri is involved and is keeping something from them. Now this scene involving the gathering of lieutenants lasts for 5 pages and it is completely cut from the anime. Now this may be because there's a lot of speculative talk taking place here, and a lot of the information during this exchange is confirmed by Mayuri during his conversation with Yamamoto later on in the episode. Now the following pages of chapter 489 covering Ichigo's battle against Kilge are adapted into the intro of episode 3. Chapter 489 continues by showing us a scene where Yhwach learns that Ichigo is fighting Kilge within Hueco Mundo, and he orders the Wandan Reich to begin their invasion of the Soul Society. Now in the anime, this scene is rearranged and then actually is shown after Kilge activates his holy form. Additionally, after Yhwach learns that Ichigo is fighting within Hueco Mundo, a scene is cut within the anime where Yhwach comments on Ichigo being preoccupied with Kilge, and that there is no better time than now to invade the Soul Society. Additionally, the conversation between Mayuri and Yamamoto that takes place at the end of chapter 489 is moved to a later point in the episode, after Kajomaru finishes speaking to Shino and Ryunosuke. The conversation between them appears to be extended also, as it begins with Yamamoto asking if Mayuri knows why he has been called here, whereas in the manga they're already talking before we cut to them. After he asks him why he didn't get permission before he had killed the 28,000 residents of Rukongai, we get some anime only dialogue, as Mayuri explains the consequences of not having acted quickly after a large number of Hollows were eliminated by the Quincy. He goes on to say that the sacrifices of some citizens within Rukongai is not that big of a loss if it had helped to stabilize the balance of the worlds. The scene at the start of chapter 490 is placed later on in the episode, and it takes place immediately after Yhwach decides to begin the invasion on the Soul Society. Now, after some chopping and changing of events, we return to Ichigo vs Kilge and the portions of their fight from chapter 490 that take place immediately after the anime opening. The scene where Kilge is informed by Yhwach to take out Ichigo is removed from the anime. Within the manga, we see a close-up shot of Kilge's ear where an earpiece is providing him with intel and updates. But because the scene where Yhwach learns about Ichigo being within Hueco is reorganized, this scene no longer makes sense. So instead, Kilge goes on to activate his Quincy Holy Form. Ichigo says an additional anime-only line here where he thinks that Kilge has just used Let Steal, which is a transformation that Uryu had used in the past. Towards the end of chapter 490, the scene with Urahara running with Pesce and Donachaka is actually moved to later on in the episode, and this is because Urahara senses that the Quincy have begun their invasion of the Soul Society. They had put this at the end of the episode and altered the sequence of events again so that the episode ends on a dramatic note. Chapter 490 ends as we see Yhwach's foot appearing above the Soul Society. This is also cut from the anime, as it's replaced in favor of showing Yhwach's full body over the Soul Society towards the end of the episode. Orihime's comments at the start of chapter 491 about not feeling a Reishi shockwave after Kilge activates his holy form is actually cut from the episode. Additionally, Ichigo's 2-page internal monologue in chapter 491 about Uryu's Let Steal form is cut. Now, during these 2 pages, he compares Kilge's holy form to Uryu's Let Steal form. He even recalls what Urahara had told him about the Let Steal, and this is cut from the anime too. When Kilge uses his ability God's Justice and he begins to gather Reishi from the surroundings, a scene where Chad comments on this is cut from the anime, along with an internal monologue by Orihime that follows Chad's comments, where she now understands why she didn't feel a Reishi shockwave after Kilge had activated his holy form. At the start of chapter 492, Aeon looking back at the 3 beasts is cut, where they comment on him being worried about them. Instead, the anime cuts to Aeon screaming and charging towards Kilge. Before Aeon charges, Apache tells Ichigo and the others that they are not his enemies, so they better get out of the way if they don't want to get hurt, since the towering beast is unpredictable. Now, this brief moment is also cut from the anime. We then get an anime exclusive scene of Uryu at his father's library within their home. He is looking through the books trying to learn about anything that would help him to explain what is going on at the moment. Ryuken finds Uryu and tells him that he isn't allowed in here without his permission, but he explains to his father that the Soul Society and Hueco Mundo have been invaded by the Quincy. Additionally, he tells him that there shouldn't be any other Quincy aside from themselves, as he asks if he had known about their existence. But Ryuken dismisses Uryu by telling him that it has nothing to do with him. Uryu says that as the last Quincy, he has a right to know about who these other Quincy are. But Ryuken does give him a hint that the answer that he is looking for cannot be found within this library. We then cut to the Soul Society as we see Shino and Ryunosuke, but a comedic scene of them getting lost is cut from the anime. Another brief comedic moment is cut after Ryunosuke asks his question about why the Shinigami and Quincy are fighting, despite them having the same goal of eliminating Hollows. The cut scene involves Shino scolding him, telling him that they are fighting because the Quincy had declared war on the Soul Society. The introduction of the 6th seat of the 13th Division, Kajomaru, is also altered. In the manga, he overhears their conversation and says that the rumors about the Shinigami Academy not teaching their students about the Quincy is true. Some of this exchange is rearranged and reworded, and I'm guessing that it's for the sake of pacing and in general streamlining their conversation within the anime. In the middle of Kajomaru's explanation, we cut back to Uryu during an anime-only scene where he notes that there is not much written text on the history of the Quincy. But then after remembering his master Soken Ishida, he enters his father's office where he finds a book. Now this book had belonged to Soken Ishida and presumably it has the Quincy history within it. While he is reading, Kajomaru continues his dialogue about the Quincy and Shinigami failing to reach an agreement, and then the Shinigami being given the order to eliminate the Quincy about 200 years ago via the Quincy extermination operation. While Kajomaru is speaking, we cut back and forth to Uryu while he is reading the book, giving some great context and added meaning behind Uryu learning the true history of the Quincy. Now returning to Hueco Mundo, a scene where Chad is commenting on Aeon smashing Kilge repeatedly on the ground is cut. He says that Aeon is doing too much and that he is completely out of control. Now quite a bit of chapter 493 is cut and changed around within the episode. In the manga, when Kilge first uses his absolute subordination of Reishi technique, he absorbs Aeon and transforms into a large form, taking up some of Aeon's characteristics. The 3 beasts end up running away from him and they hide with Orihime and Chad, and this entire section of them hiding is cut from the anime. In particular, this iconic panel where Kilge finds them and he uses the technique again to absorb the Reishi of the 3 beasts and Orihime and Chad. The anime, on the other hand, has Kilge use the technique to absorb Aeon, and then he uses it again after having transformed to absorb the other's reishi, as it totally skips past the hide and seek section of chapter 493. Now, the final anime-only scene involving Uryu and his father in this episode occurs right before the end of the episode, as Ryuken sees him in his office and scolds him again for entering without his permission. Uryu asks if the things written within his grandfather's book are true. If they are, then Ryuken had known about the Wandenreich, Yuhabak, and he had even known about how his mother had died. Yet again, Ryuken ends up dismissing him and he tells him that it has nothing to do with him. This of course angers Uryu, who is left with no choice but to leave. A scene at the end of chapter 493 is altered within the anime. After Kajomaru reassures Shino and Ryunosuke that the enemy will enter through the gates, an explosion ends up erupting in the anime. But in the manga, we get some commentary from Yuhabak, who appears above them, alerting the 13th Division squad members to his presence. Now this is all cut from the anime, and instead several pillars of light erupt across the Serete, as Yuhabak states that conflicts are painful. The events of chapter 494 are quickly adapted into the last couple of minutes of the episode, as they impactfully reveal the Quincy having launched their attack against the Soul Society. A scene involving Rukia rushing to the Pillars of Light is cut here. Most likely it will be included in the next episode. Additionally, the scene involving the third seated officer who kneels before Yamamoto ends up having no dialogue within the anime, and I'm assuming that they will flesh out these moments that they have glanced over at the end of this episode in the next one, as they had really wanted to end this episode on an impactful note, as these Sternritters are revealed and the iconic scene where Kira is pretty much killed is shown to us. They cut a lot of the dialogue out of this chapter in general, and specifically during the scene where Kira is speaking to the 3rd, 5th and 6th seated officers of the 3rd Division, as they talk about the enemy being within the Pillars of Light. The attack begins as the Sternritters are revealed and they are ordered to kill all Shinigami, as the episode concludes with Hashward appearing as he declares that the purge of the Shinigami has now begun. Now this brings us to the end of episode 3, as yet again we have another episode with several changes made to the order of events and how they occur, with some comedic scenes being cut and some scenes that disrupt the flow of the fighting that are not needed for the plot also being cut. Now the most notable addition that was made was scenes that had involved Uryu and his father, which I'm pretty happy to see. I love how Kajomaru's monologue was blended into Uryu reading his grandfather's book, and overall this was yet again another solid episode, and one that has me looking forward to seeing if Uryu's role will be expanded upon, since he is getting so much more screen time in the early portions of this story arc in comparison to the manga. Now I think from next week the pacing will actually slow down, since the anime will really be diving deep into the fight scenes, which we were all promised would be expanded upon within the anime. I cannot wait to see how they will add to the highly anticipated fights between the different captains and the Sternritters. Now let me know all of your thoughts on the changes, cuts and additions that were made to the 3rd episode of the 1000 Year Blood War arc. Lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I can't wait to see you in my next Bleach video. If you enjoy my content, then you can support my channel through Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or even through YouTube by becoming a channel member. You will gain access to exclusive channel perks and a Discord server which I frequently use. So become a member of my Zero Division and be the first to know about my upcoming videos. And once again, thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.